Hello and welcome to Unco, a podcast about what's unusual in tech. I'm your host, Timothy Buck. In last week's episode, I compared the recent launch of the HomePod to the launch of the original Apple Watch, and addressed the question of whether Apple is learning from their mistakes. In this week's show, I sat down with Marco Suarez, design systems head at InVision and former designer for Etsy and MailChimp. We discussed his decision to be a remote worker, and we dove into the topic of design systems, what they are, how they work, and the many benefits they provide to each team involved in making digital products. Hi, Marco. How's it going?
It's going great.
Nice to have you on the show. I wanted to kind of start off with a short introduction of who you are. I know you've done design for Etsy and for MailChimp, and now you're leading design systems at InVision. Can you tell me and my listeners a little bit of your story and how you ended up getting in design and ended up where you are right now?
Sure. Art has always been kind of the strength I've had since I was a kid. And when I was in college, I was with some friends and not really knowing what to major in. And one of them said, you should look into graphic design. And I was like, what is that? So looked into it, thought it seemed pretty awesome. I love the idea of being able to do artistic, creative things and get paid. So pursued graphic design and started out in working for a marketing agency, and then taught myself how to code, just basic HTML. Actually, back then it was websites were coded with tables. So I learned that first.
I remember
that. Yep. And then eventually, taught myself CSS and started just doing web design. And then around 2010, I was working with fellow designer Matthew Smith and Jamin Jantz. We had a small shop called Squared Eye, and that Matthew started. And we had a client give us a ring to do an app. And it's not the first time we worked on an app, but the thing that was different about them is at the end of the project, they offered to hire us all full time as their design team. And we ended up taking it, and that company is called Zarly. They're still around. They've pivoted a couple times since I worked there. Jamin actually still works for Zarly.
I know Jamin.
So that was my introduction into digital product design. And at the time, it didn't seem like I was doing something vastly different. But looking back now, I was like, that was a very clear transition from like web design, traditional graphic design stuff, to doing product work. And after that, I worked for a very short amount of time at another company called the Iron Yard, which is a kind of like a tech school where they do intensive, like 12-week courses to teach you things like front-end engineering or different languages. And at the time, we were interested in starting a digital design or digital product design program, and it did not work. So we had a very short runway, and it didn't get off the ground. And so after that, moved over to MailChimp, and there I worked on the marketing team and also on the product team on their mobile apps. And then from there, moved over to Etsy, and now I'm at InVision app.
So one thing that I found interesting about you and your career is that you've chosen to work remotely from South Carolina instead of moving to, a major city like New York or San Francisco. How did you end up making that decision?
So I got into digital product design kind of later on, when I already had, at the time I had one kid. And we were living here and honestly didn't really know what opportunities were out there. And this Zarly really opened my eyes to the startup scene and the tech scene in San Francisco. And I would at the time they were a distributed company as well. And eventually they moved their headquarters to San Fran. So I would go to San Fran about every 6 weeks. And I loved it. It was awesome. And so we actually, my wife and I started looking to moving there. And at the same time though felt like, I don't know, a little uneasy about it. And then it's funny because I was having a conversation with the creative director at MailChimp, Ron Lewis, and we were talking about the Southeast and how all of this talent is moving to San Fran, New York. And he's kind of had this comment of like, you should stay in the Southeast and make the Southeast known for design. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And over time I thought about it, I was like, actually I like living here. I like the Southeast. This is home. It's my family lives here. This is kind of where we want to raise our kids. And my wife and I talked about it, and I was like, like remote is a thing, and we should, if we want to, we shouldn't feel pressured to move. We can live here and figure out how to make it work. And that's what we've done. We did move to Atlanta for a period of time, but the rest of the time, we lived here in Greenville, and we've just figured out how to make it work. And Etsy was kind enough to kind of take a risk on me because they at the time had a good amount of remote engineers, but no remote designers. So I was their first remote designer. And now there's a few of them, but that was, a risk that they were willing to take. And so I wanted to make sure that they made the right decision and worked my butt off and, made it work.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I guess my wife and I have a kind of the opposite story in that we moved to San Francisco from the Southeast, but that concept of remote work and how even here where like we use Slack all day and we don't do as a product manager, I do meet a lot with different parts of the company, so I have a lot of in-person meetings, but our developers spend the majority of the time working by themselves on their computers, and we have teams in multiple cities and multiple offices, but we still don't do the you're allowed to work remote full-time thing. I think it's interesting that even in such like the tech world, that companies are kind of like afraid of allowing people to work from home or work from cities where they're the only person in that city. I don't really know why, but I've seen that here for sure.
Oh yeah, it's super interesting because like the argument is often made about communication, and I will agree that there's nothing that replaces being in the same room as a person, but there is technology that can manage the majority of your interactions, and we all use that technology, and like any large company will probably have multiple offices, and so you're kind of already used to that. And I was even talking with one of the design directors at Google about this, and I was like, why? Google has offices all over the place. Why don't they allow remote more? And the answer was just like, well, it's just never been done before, and it's just a cultural thing, and there's not really a good reason. I was like, that's really unfortunate because I totally understand the drawbacks of remote, but at the same time, like it opens your talent pool up dramatically. InVision is a completely remote company, and we have people like literally all over the world, and in completely different time zones. Like my team, the design systems team, has a person in San Francisco and a person in England, and we have to do there's a short period of time in which we all overlap, but it has not prevented us from doing really good work and progressing really fast. And I feel like if companies were a little more open to it, they would find talent being a little bit easier to acquire and retain, and it not being as difficult as they might think.
Yeah, and I think and then it ties into all the like living and expense issues in the major cities, and yeah, I think if more companies were open to that, I don't know if we would. I mean, we love living here, but for me, it's mostly just being surrounded by a lot of other people who are interested in the same things, and in people who I can learn from, and just like the people I meet on a daily basis are just really incredible people. And so that at this early point in my career, I want to be surrounded by that and be pushed by that and be surrounded by people who have, even bigger ambition than I do. I think that's really healthy. But
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, we would not be opposed to moving to some cheaper city where that's still a great city. But and if I could work for a company that I'm really interested in working for, but so many of
Yep.
them are opposed to that you kind of have to get here, um,
Yep.
to even work at the companies you want to work for.
Yep. And yeah, I agree with you. Like San Francisco, New York are awesome cities, and you have a lot of things at your fingertips that you wouldn't, living in other cities. But if you don't want to live there, you shouldn't
Right,
feel like you
exactly.
have to.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So, at InVision today, you lead the design systems team. What are design systems, and how is that different from just like a traditional design team?
That's a great question. So I'd say that like the process or the things that we do isn't really any different. It's just that the output or our customer is slightly different. So a normal product team would be focusing on building features or applications or tools that create value for the company and for the customer. And so they're focusing on new development, the whatever the company does, like the actual application, the actual tool. We focus on more of the platform of that and the way that that is the the way that the interface looks and behaves. So it's kind of void or working void of context in a way. So as a product team is working through a process, working through flows, and then they're reaching in the parts bin for all of the widgets and the things to make the solution to the problem that they're trying to solve. And so we're the ones building out the Lego pieces in a way.
So are you
Interfaces are. Yeah, go ahead.
so are you building like a style guide, or is it more complex than that?
It's more complex than that in the sense, and terminology is within the design system community is all over the place, and so it really depends on what you mean by style guide. But the way I define it, style guide is a static artifact or a reference um, for different, whether it's brand expression or product expression, different guidelines and rules. Whereas the design system is a tool in itself, so it marries the standards with actual components,
Hmm.
and based on component based development. Uh, and it's done in a way that it's trying to achieve a few things. The primary ones are just consistency, but also reusability, and that kind of gets into the whole like scale thing. Like design systems enables design to scale, and at larger companies, this is something that is extremely important and necessary. Smaller companies, it doesn't quite matter as much because they aren't feeling the pressure to scale and to maintain a large body of work. So that's the problem that design systems tries to solve and provide some value for a company.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. So what would I guess an example output be that then design teams who are working on specific products would use? Would that can you give maybe a handful of examples of what like your team would produce?
Yeah, I mean within the context of digital product design, applications, whether they're on web or mobile, apps kind of use the same body of components: topography, buttons, color, cards, forms. And in a older world, designers would design each screen, and they would design the components that they needed for that screen, and they would move on to the next screen and design that screen. And there's this workflow of screen by screen. And when you mix in other designers into that, as a team grows from a couple designers to a dozen to several dozen, this screen by screen design produces what we call design debt, which is an overabundance of these similar but very different conventions, styles, treatments. So it's like a designer designing a button and they style it a certain way. Another designer designs a similar looking button but styles it slightly different, and the code's completely different. And so for one component like a button, you have these crazy permutations and an insane amount of code to maintain what to a user is one button. So with the design system, you are producing one button, and then you're reusing the exact same button everywhere a button is needed. So what that does is it reduces, and you're looking at it from a holistic standpoint across the entire app as opposed to screen by screen. And so what that does is it alleviates the amount of time a designer would take normally to design screen by screen, a button or an input or text styles or something. And it also reduces the amount of time that engineers are needing to maintain all that code. And an example of this is when I was at Etsy, we worked on a project to flatten all of our buttons, which was, during the time when everyone was going flat. And so the buttons were they had a gradient, they had like some strokes and inner strokes and shadows and stuff. And so a designer wanted to go through and just flatten all the buttons. And it took weeks to do this and an insane amount of code. And I actually have a screenshot of her diff to show like how much code she had to remove in order to flatten a bunch of buttons that literally all look the same. And so like just maintaining an application like that is a huge pain. Whereas in the design system, if that button is referenced in one place, you make that change in one place and it propagates out to everywhere that button is being used. So you're able to maintain a very large app with a very small amount of code. And that increases production time, it decreases the errors, it makes it more stable. There's a lot of benefits to it.
Yeah, and it sounds like based on that example that it would speed up your agility too. Like if you decided tomorrow that you wanted to change all your buttons, if there's really one place to make that change, then you can do it really, really quickly instead of taking weeks.
Yep.
That's really cool.
Exactly.
So does a company like InVision typically have a single design system for like a product, or would they have different design systems per product? Or I guess maybe I'll reword that. Would InVision have one design system for the whole company, or would they have specific ones for each product?
So the primary value of a design system is the reusability. So you want to reuse it as much as possible.
Okay.
And so we have one design system for all of the web applications, which is every feature that InVision has on the web. Now we have, we're releasing InVision Studio, which is a desktop application, and that's using a different body of code. We also have a marketing team that produces all of our marketing sites, and they're producing their own design system, and with the eventual goal that there would be elements of both of our systems that are shared, this kind of transcendent layer that would go across both of our design systems, while allowing us to do what we need to do, because marketing site and software have very different needs, and you want to be able to accommodate those needs. So we understand, based on experience from Etsy, I know that there's like very big differences, but at the same time, there's a lot of similarities. So there's this core layer that can be consistent and the same, while giving these other ways to meet the needs of software and marketing sites. But at the same time, I know there are other companies that have decided to produce different design systems for different either brands, sub-brands, different products. And this is based on like the needs they have. A lot of times it's technology based, like what kind of they're built on different technologies, so there's different needs, or the components or the brand is so vastly different that they need to do something different, or even like in our sense, it's just to not hold each other back. As we're developing our design system, we don't want to be a blocker to the marketing team, and vice versa. At the same time, it is a very concrete way to keep things aligned that need to be aligned. And obviously, at InVision, we're communicating the same brand, whether you're on a marketing site or in a product. And so instead of just being like, oh, we'll like make sure we keep each other in the loop, or we'll just talk often, there needs to be like kind of concrete ways at which we are linking the two together. Like for instance, our brand color is pink, so we don't need to we can just reference that pink in one place and have both design systems, be connected to it. So that's one, like colors, type. There's certain things that we plan to have as a transcendent layer across both systems.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's cool.
At Etsy, there was a similar problem too, where we had, at the time, we had Etsy.com, which was made up of a marketplace, the buyer side, and seller tools. And then we were working on another brand expression called Etsy Studio, and it was a slightly different marketplace with a different expression of Etsy, almost like a sister brand. And so we, instead of producing a whole other design system for the seller side for the Etsy Studio, we added a layer of abstraction to our design system that allowed us to theme it, basically. So there are core values that will render a completely different looking application, even though it's using the same code. So like an input is an input, but we can make the input look completely different just by switching out some values in our CSS. And so we're utilizing design tokens to be able to do that, which design tokens adds a variable into like the value of a CSS property. And depending on where that token maps to, you can render completely different looking UIs, which is a really genius way of, again, being able to maintain a very small body of code, but be able to actually be maintaining like multiple applications or multiple brand expressions. It's pretty cool way of doing things.
Yeah. It definitely seems like it adds a lot of efficiency. The first thing that comes to mind, though, is how do you make sure that you design a system in a way that you don't hinder people from, solving whatever problem they're trying to solve in the product in the best way possible? Like, if they have a problem they're trying to solve, but the design system didn't have that in mind, how do you make sure that you're not preventing that innovation step?
I think that there's two realities of any system. One is the reality is it's going to fail at some point, and the goal is just to make it last as long as possible. And right. The other reality is that it's not going to solve all your problems. So the way I view it is the design system should account for 85% of the use cases, but there's always going to be this percentage that is going to be custom or unique. And there's two different approaches too. One is, if that solution is reusable, then it should probably be added to the system. So if there is a need that is currently not in the design system, then develop a solution in a way that is reusable, and then add it back into the system in order to grow the system. We at Etsy, everyone, and even at InVision, everyone has the ability to contribute to the design system, and we developed a whole contribution guideline process. And the other thing is, if it's not reusable, then just do something different. I think the main problem lies in the fact that the design system really can accommodate 85% of the use cases, but designers either are not educated on what the design system can do, or they're not willing to yield to it. There's a great Medium post about like producing solutions that are consistent across an entire flow is better than doing something that is bespoke on a screen, even if that bespoke creation is actually a slightly better design solution, because to a user, they're seeing it, they're experiencing your application in a flow. And when they hit that use case that is unique, it's another thing for them to learn. Whereas you've already been teaching them all these conventions prior to that. So you might as well be using that in order to make the app easier to use.
Huh.
And so I think I mean, I 100% agree with that. I think designers over time will get used to the idea of using the design system and yield to it. And then as they use it, the app, they'll see that those are actually better solutions than doing something really bespoke and, clever in one area. It actually is not as helpful to the user as they may think.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how did you get interested in the whole concept of design systems? It sounds like you were doing that at Etsy and then now at InVision. Was that just something that you picked up at Etsy because that's what they were doing there in their design team, or how did you learn about it?
So every digital product company I worked at, I either contributed to or helped build a design system. So at Zarly, back before design systems was even a phrase people were using, we developed a system. We called it a self-styling style guide, but it was the exact same thing: typography, buttons, forms, cards, like avatars, anything, spinners, loading spinners, anything you can think of. And we developed, me and two engineers developed that, and product team, I think they even are still using it. But then at MailChimp, we had a design system that I also, in a lighter capacity, contributed to. And then at Etsy, when I first arrived there was nothing. And me and a few designers, like, we always talked about how great it would be to have a design system, and how much we needed it. And a team on our seller experience created the first iteration of it. And so they were working on a redesign of a particular feature, and they designed the foundation for the design system through that feature. So they built the system, used that system to power that feature. And then once that launched, it was in the general release, they opened it up to whoever could use it. And I, of course, jumped on it and started using it. We developed a working group to keep it growing and bettering. And then there was enough momentum that our design leadership decided to form a design systems team. And I was the first person I was asked to join that team and help start it. And at first I was like, I think there are other people who are better equipped than me. Some of the designers that actually built the initial design system, I felt like should be the ones, but I was kind of in a good place at the right time, where everyone else was kind of deep into other parts of the application, and I was kind of ready to transition to something new, and hopped into it. And at first, like I said, I had experience with it, didn't value it as much as I do now. And it took a little time for me to really get it and for it to click, and for me to experience the pain of not using a design system and the relief that a design system provides. And once I got that, then it was, completely different. And that has turned into the thing that I not only specialize in, but what continually interests me, and even where design system leads, because it doesn't end at components, because design systems is all about creating alignment, getting people to work better together and produce better work. And that, to me, is kind of a theme within digital product design that I've really come to love. So that kind of starts to lead into design ops, which is kind of a bigger umbrella. And at InVision, our team is the design ops team, and the design system is one of the output of our team. And now we're getting into the internal workings of our process, how we define design, how we work together as a team to be more efficient and produce better results. And so that path, I've really come to enjoy and love, and become very interested in. And even though I'm not necessarily doing things that are directly impacting customers, a lot of the work we do, impacts them indirectly. I'm fine with that. I love the inner workings of a design team. That's really been where I've really been passionate.
So the way that you get feedback on a typical product is to go to the user, figure out what their pain points are, and then you learn on that, and that's how you iterate and improve a product. I'm assuming is there something similar in a design system? Are you meeting and interacting regularly with the product designers who are using this system and getting feedback from them on how to improve it, or how does that process work?
Yeah, it is the entire product team. So does even though design systems has the word design in it, it is a function of engineering, product design,
Right. Yep.
um, and so our customers are our product team, and we have this unique viewpoint. Like as teams grow, it's common for designers, engineers, PMs to organize around discrete parts of an application. So like at Etsy, we had a team solely dedicated to search and to checkout and to the listing page and to the homepage, etc. And they go very deep into those areas. Whereas design systems, you're working across all of those. So you're exposed to the nuances of all of those teams and where they diverge, how they differ, and the problems that causes. Because to a customer, it's just one app, whereas internally, you realize that this single flow of like on Etsy purchasing an item is the work of like 12 different teams, and so you get this unique advantage to see how all these teams are functioning and the problems that causes. And so we are like that's not our only customer. Our customers are the users of our applications, and that's where we get like the time to be able to produce components that degrade gracefully, that are that meet accessibility requirements,
Mm-hmm.
browser compatibility, performance, all these things that our user experience concerns, but other product teams might not have the time to really dive into them. So we can do that work for them and support them in that way.
So going into this, I really honestly had only read a little bit about design systems. I didn't know that much about it, and where I've worked, we haven't used them. So this is really interesting. Does your team have developers on it? So you design your team designed something, and you actually develop the code that is then reused by the product teams?
Yeah, so our team currently is just 3 people. Myself leading the design efforts. We have a UX writer named Sophie who's leading
Oh, cool.
the content, and an engineer, Mark, who is leading the engineering efforts. And so having those, and then eventually as we grow, we'll hire, product manager. And what's nice about that is like Mark is there to support the engineering team on the engineering front. So he's working with them, building adoption, education, all that kind of stuff. I'm working with our design team and advocating for adoption within design, looking at the problems and addressing the issues of like where the design system isn't working and how we can better it. And then so if a product manager, they'll be working with the product team, and Sophie's working with marketing and with design and engineering as well, to make sure that we're being consistent in how we write and how we express our brand, how we talk about our products. So it's nice to be able to have everyone represented within the team, to where it's a very balanced, team. We don't if it and I think this is a very important thing, because if it was only designers, the likelihood that engineering would see it as a service to engineering would probably not be there. Or if it was just an engineering function, then design probably would not, see that it was for them as well. So having that representation is really important to building adoption and ownership of the design system and making full use of it. So yeah, it's this cool mix of all the different disciplines within a product team.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I'll definitely have to read more about it. If you mentioned an article, maybe you can send me the link to that, and I'll put it in the show notes as well, for people who are interested in learning more. It's really cool.
Yeah, and there's also I was fortunate enough to contribute to a book that InVision wrote called Design Systems. It's on designbetter.co, and it has everything from what design systems is, how to build a design system, how to further it, like the future of design systems. It's a very comprehensive guide with a lot of resources. I mean, an incredible amount of videos and links to other articles, interviews, as well as just the content of the book. So it's a really great resource if you want to know more about design systems.
Yeah, definitely send me that link as well, and I'll put that in the show notes too, and I'll check it out myself. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I always end the episodes with the same question. What is one thing that you find unusual in tech right now?
There's a lot of things.
Yeah.
One that it seems really interesting to me is I feel like digital product designers are kind of having a identity crisis right now. And what I mean by that is there is such a huge amount of skills that are kind of being required or demanded that designers have. Everything from the ability to conduct research and perform user testing to product management skills, experience with marketing, writing, just development, whether that's front end development, the whole debate whether designers should code,
right,
and business skills, like business understanding. And as that like skill set grows, it's like, man, like this is so interesting to me how hard it is to define what a digital product designer is supposed to do and where their skill set should lie. And even like the fact that digital product design is still not something that's really taught in schools yet. Most of the designers that I know come out from a web or graphic design background and education, and even design is within the art school typically, even though like digital product design is much more akin to industrial design.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who come out of industrial design and find themselves into digital product design, but it's interesting to me that we're in this period of like, we kind of roll our eyes at designers that spend a lot of time on the UI and all the like fancy, animations and interactions. So we're like, that's not, you're not thinking about the user, even though like that's an important part of the customer experience. Or we swing to the other side where it's so heavy on the research and the UX that the UI is has a lot of issues. So it's like, man, where are digital product designers supposed to live? Like, where is our home base? Like, what are we supposed to just like nail consistently every time? And something that like I've kind of lazily been researching and reading about, and kind of like on Twitter, posting a poll like, how did you get into digital product design and stuff? This is really interesting to me. I feel like I think like a dribble is a really great kind of like symptom of the issue, because dribble was always this place of showing UI and less like showing like design in the sense of layout. Mm-hmm. And now like a lot of designers, even though like dribble still has like great use, designers kind of roll their eyes at it because they're like, oh, like you don't know, that's nothing. You need like case studies and explains everything about the product and the user testing and how you arrived at the solution and what this does for business goals and the whole process and how like engineering is involved. And it's just like it's an interesting evolution of digital product design right now. So that's to me, it's something that is unusual, although I bet it's always been in some state of oddness and flux and tension of some sort.
Yeah, that is really interesting. It seems like it's maybe in a transition period, and over the next, 5 to 10 years, we may see that job title break out into more than one job for especially at larger companies, right? Maybe not at small startups or whatever, but once you get to a certain size and you can afford to break out into specialties, designers may end up focusing on one side of that or the other.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's already happening. You look at the stuff that like Airbnb is doing with where you basically just wireframe and it intelligently knows what you're drawing and converts it into the component itself. So you're able to build UIs just through a wireframe, which is like, yes, that is an incredible efficiency. But that scares a lot of designers because that means that the layout and the pushing pixels is being taken away from them. It's like, well, it's not disappearing, but you're right. It is kind of separating to where through a design systems, like we're focused on the UI, we're focused on those Lego pieces. But if a designer is working on, different hypotheses for a problem, they can create a ton of prototypes for user testing in a very short amount of time and gain a considerable amount of information very quickly. So it is like already happening, but it's definitely like, and even design systems itself is often kind of seen as a threat to design and through designers and being able to, create these bespoke creations. So there's definitely some stuff going on, and we'll see where it leads.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Thank you so much for coming on. Where are some places that people can find you on the internet?
Twitter is probably the best place. Probably one of the most active. My handle is my name at Marco Suarez or Suarez, depending on how you pronounce it. My website is honestly pretty horrible and embarrassing, but it does link to some of the stuff I've written about design systems, and also some books that I found really fascinating and helpful in learning about design systems and digital product design. But Twitter's probably the best
And is
place.
that marcosuarez.com or?
Yep, that's right. Sorry. Yeah,
okay.
marcosuarez.com.
Okay, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a good discussion.
You can find Unco on Twitter at _UncoFM, and you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Overcast, or wherever else you happen to get your podcasts. If you'd like to support the show, you can do that on Patreon at patreon.com/UncoFM.